So today we are continuing our Raising series, and in this series we are discovering how each of us can raise others up. How each of us can play a part in Jesus' command to the church to make disciples. And that's what we're exploring together through the example that we see in the book of Acts of Barnabas and Paul. And so we're looking at this together because we don't want us just to assume that we leave this to a select few. But we want us to recognize that we each have a part to play when it comes to raising others up. And so this series, Raising, sits under our theme for this year, which is also called Raising, which sits under our purpose as a church community, which, as I've just said, is to be a family on mission. And our purpose remains the same year to year. And our mission is to welcome people home to God and to raise... See what we did there? Raise fully devoted followers of Jesus and to bring transformation to our neighbors, our nation, and the nations. Because you don't have to look far, do you, to see that things are not as God intended them to be. And that there is a job for the church in this day and age to see his kingdom come and his will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so in this series, we're looking at the role that Barnabas plays in raising up Paul. Paul, who when we first meet him is known as Saul, who goes on to be the most prominent leader within the early church, who writes 13 of the 21 New Testament letters, and who becomes known as the Apostle Paul, and whose teaching has defined what we believe as Christians today. And that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the role that Barnabas plays in raising up Paul. Because without Barnabas, who we hear much less about, who is much less of a central figure, but without Barnabas, we don't get Paul and all that Paul goes on to do, which we even benefit from today. Barnabas, with the role that he plays, it leads to Paul and all that Paul does. So as we've been exploring in recent weeks, Barnabas, through his example, through leading by example that we looked at in week 1, through his encouragement. Barnabas, we learn his real name is Joseph. Barnabas is his nickname, and it means son of encouragement. That his friends looked at him and thought, this guy is such an encourager. We need to give him a nickname. Let's call him Barnabas. And we see that actually he gives courage to others. We looked last week at how he actually takes a really significant risk on Paul. And today we're going to continue that journey to see the role that Barnabas plays in raising up Paul. Because without Barnabas, we don't get Paul and all that Paul goes on to do. So what I want us to consider together first this morning is that raising redefines success. That raising redefines success. That without raising, success is limited to our individual achievements, which may be brilliant, which may be worthy of celebration, but it's limited. It doesn't go beyond our individual impact without raising. But raising redefines success, because with raising, when raising, success is framed by multiplication. Success is framed by multiplication. It's defined by those we raise up and what they go on to do. And our hope and our prayer is that they go far beyond us and do things that we could never do, and that our ego doesn't get in the way. Because raising redefines success. With raising, our success is in our successors. Our success is in what those that come after us, that we raise up, that we release and bless and encourage and take risks on, what they go on to do. Thinking about family on mission, our purpose with raising, our success is in those our successors welcome home to God. With raising, our success is in those that our successors raise up and release and send out. With raising, our success is in the transformation that our successors, those that we've raised up, bring to the world around them, because raising redefines success. And we see this in the relationship between Barnabas and Paul. So we meet Barnabas first before we meet Paul. Barnabas is a follower of Jesus first before Paul is a follower of Jesus. Barnabas is a leader and an influence within the early church before Paul is even on the scene. But Barnabas plays this significant role in raising up Paul. You could say that Paul is one of Barnabas's threes, and that Barnabas is one of Paul's ones. And now you might be thinking, you've lost me there, because you're talking some weird code. So if that's you, I can understand why you're thinking that. Let me just remind you of what we looked at in the first week of our series, if you were here. If not, I'll just catch you up. We talked about disciple making 1, 2, 3. Then when it comes to being fully devoted followers of Jesus and raising fully devoted followers of Jesus, we all need 1s, 2s, and 3s. We all need 1s, the people who speak into us, who shape us, who invest us, who pour into us, invest into us. And then we all need 2s. We need the running partners in the race that God has called us to, the people that will stand shoulder to shoulder and strengthen us. And then we all need 3s, because otherwise it ends with us. We all need the people that we can pour what we have received into, however seemingly big or small that may be, the people that we can pass something on to and encourage and invest and take a risk on. So you could say that when we first meet Barnabas and Paul and they begin their relationship, you could say that Barnabas is one of Paul's ones, and that, I'm going to get the numbers the wrong way around, Paul is one of Barnabas's 3s. If you're with me. Are you with me? But what happens is we start to see a shift in their relationship. And it's as if from Acts 11, it's as if they become 2s for each other. And this happens sometimes in life, that the people we raise up begin as 3s, and then they become our 2s, and maybe they become a 1. And that is wonderful as we see the success and the fruitfulness of others. And our prayer is that our ego would never stand in the way. But in Acts 11, we start to see this shift. It's as if Paul and Barnabas become running partners. They become 2s for each other. Running partners in the ministry. We see it in Acts 11, verse 25. It says, "Then Barnabas went to Tarsus to look for Saul. And when he found him, he brought him to Antioch. So for a whole year, Barnabas and Saul were 2s. They met with the church and taught great numbers of people. The disciples were called Christians first at Antioch." It is as if their relationship shifts and they become 2s for each other. They become running partners, those that strengthen each other. But there's something significant that it's still Barnabas' name that comes first. There's still a sense we're 2s, we're in this, but there's still a sense of maturity and seniority in that Barnabas' name comes first. Then we have 4 more mentions of Barnabas and Paul and Saul ministering together. And it's Barnabas and Saul. Barnabas and Saul. And then there's a subtle shift in Acts 13, verse 42. And it says this: "As Paul and Barnabas were leaving the synagogue, the people invited them to speak further about these things on the next Sabbath." Did you spot the subtle shift? There's actually 2, because Saul becomes known as Paul, which is another story for another day. But instead of Barnabas and Saul, it's Paul and Barnabas. There is a subtle shift that these 2s, these running partners, there is a subtle shift that the seniority or the maturity has shifted to Paul being named before Barnabas. The majority of times that we read of Paul and Barnabas following that, it's Paul that's named first. Paul and Barnabas. And then Barnabas actually fades into the background. We don't read about Barnabas in the book of Acts after Acts 15. And Paul becomes the most prominent central figure within the early church as the story unfolds. And Barnabas has played his part. He's done what he was meant to do. And then we don't hear much more about him. I wonder how he felt. I wonder how his ego got on with that. Well, as a good man who is full of faith and full of the Holy Spirit, I think he would have understood. My time is done. And look at what the person I've raised up has gone on to do. Because our success is in our successors. Our success is in those that we raise up and we release, who go far beyond we ever could and bring transformation to the world around them. And that's what we're going to consider together. We're going to consider the success of Barnabas as we look at the impact of Paul. And I'd love you to join me in welcoming Jonny, who's going to come and unpack this for us.
Good morning, church. Let's thank Bryony for a brilliant start to the message there. And it's so good to be with you here today. And I hope you're all enjoying this series as much as I am. We're currently midway through. And so far we've heard how Barnabas has raised Paul through example, through encouragement and risk. And that investment prepares Paul for mission and for all the great things that he goes on to do. And in a moment, we're going to explore how disciple making helps us to bring transformation, not just to those who we disciple, but to our neighbors, nation, and nations. And we'll see how raising and investing in others can lead to lasting transformation. And in a moment, we'll be looking how Paul impacts Malta in Acts chapter 28, verses 1 to 10. But before we do that, I just want to give you a little bit of context, what happens in the previous chapter. And Paul sets out on voyage to Rome as a prisoner, alongside soldiers, sailors, and other prisoners. And not long into that journey, we see that they're caught in a violent storm. Chaos breaks out on the ship, and they lose all sense of direction. The scripture tells us that there's no sun to help them navigate by the day, and no stars to help them navigate at night. And eventually, Luke tells us that all hope of being saved is lost. And so they're in a bit of a difficult position. I'd say they're in full-blown crisis mode at the moment. And yet, in the middle of all of that, Paul has a calmness about him. He remains calm. And more than that, he steps into leadership. He speaks into the situation. He encourages the crew, and he brings direction. Now, that's not something that just happens overnight. That's not something that just pops out of nowhere. That's a result of being shaped, formed, and invested in. The example of Barnabas, the seeds of encouragement, the hope, the belief are now beginning to bear fruit. And we see that as Paul is calm under pressure. Because crisis doesn't create character, it reveals it. And in this moment, it reveals Paul's faith, courage, and leadership. So when Paul finally lands on Malta, he's in a position to make an impact through his leadership. And so we're going to pick up in a moment at Acts 28, chapter 1, verse 1 to 10. Stay with me, church. There's 10 verses here. There's 3 months packed into this in 10 verses. So we're gonna read from there. After we had reached safety, we had learned that the island was called Malta. The natives showed us unusual kindness, since it had begun to rain and it was cold. They kindled a fire and welcomed us all around it. Paul had gathered a bundle of brushwood and was putting it on the fire when a viper, driven out by the heat, fastened itself on his hand. And when the natives saw the creature hanging from his hand, they said to one another, "This man must be a murderer. Though he has escaped from the sea, justice has not allowed him to live." He, however, shook off the creature into the fire and suffered no harm. They were expecting him to swell up or drop dead, but after they had waited a long time and saw that nothing unusual happened to him, they changed their minds and began to say that he was a god. Now, in the neighborhood of that place were lands belonging to the leading man of the island named Publius, who received us and entertained us hospitably for 3 days. It so happened that the father of Publius lay sick in bed with fever and dysentery. Paul visited him and cured him by praying and putting on his hands on him. After this happened, the rest of the people on the island the rest of the people on the island who had diseases also came and were cured. They bestowed many honors on us, and when we were about to sail, they put on board all the provisions we needed. And so when Paul lands on Malta, he arrives as a cold, wet prisoner, and yet when he leaves with honor and provision. Not just Paul, but all those that are with him. And so it made me think, what caused that shift? They came ashore, washed up with nothing, and yet when they leave with honor and provision. And when I started to look at it, I seen it all started with servanthood. Because transformation begins with servanthood. And Paul's first recorded action after the shipwreck is him gathering wood. Now, it might seem like a very small, insignificant thing to do, but it had great impact. Because what Paul did is he got around the local people and he found a way to serve. Now, that allowed him to build trust, and that opened the door to hospitality. It leads him to Publius' house, and he's one of the influential people on the island. And from there, he gets to lay hands on his sick father, who is healed, and then Paul gets to minister to all the other sick people on the island. And so this small act of servanthood opens the door for Paul. And in the same way, if we want to bring transformation to our neighbors, nation, and nations, then simply, we need to find a way to serve. That opens the door for us to minister. That opens the door for proclamation. And so Luke, the author of Acts, consistently presents servanthood as central to how God brings transformation. Not just in the Gospel of Luke, but in particular the language that he uses in this passage. And as Paul lays hands on Publius' father, Luke uses the Greek word iaume, which suggests healing in a supernatural or spiritual way. But when Luke refers to the other sick people on the island being healed, he uses a different word, therapeuo. Now, this word can imply an ongoing practical form of healing, and it carries the idea of service and care. And while there's certainly overlap, we can assume that God was at work in both of the cases. The distinction is important. I believe Luke switches the words to highlight something for us. And often this can be missed in our English translations because the same word is often used in some translations. But what Luke is trying to highlight is that Paul and his companions were not only bringing miraculous healing through prayer, they were also committed to meeting the people's needs in a broader, practical way. And so through their commitment and God's presence, they bring transformation. But transformation just doesn't stop with what we do as individuals. It carries on through the people that we invest in. And so lasting transformation comes through raising others. Now, Paul was on the island for 3 months in total, and yet the impact lasted. And, today we still see Malta as a predominantly Christian country. And that's because Paul understood that he was just one link in the transmission of the gospel. A very important one, but not the final one for sure. And just that he had been raised up and empowered others, especially by Barnabas, he knew the importance of raising others to maximize his impact. Because our success is found in our successors. And Paul didn't just make disciples, he raised disciple makers. In 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2, he writes to Timothy and says, for what you have heard from me through many witnesses, entrust to faithful people who will be able to teach others as well. And one scholar highlights that this verse actually reveals 4 generations of discipleship. It's something that I missed initially, but when we look at it, we see Paul, we see many witnesses, we see Timothy, and we see faithful people who teach others. And this model of discipleship has led to over 2 billion Christians. And the good news is, church, we all get to play a part in that. We all get to play a part in raising others up and bringing them into Christ. And generational discipling is the foundation of a healthy church. And it brings me great joy to see what a wonderful church community that we have and how each generation feeds into the next, invests into the next generation. And last week, Bryony gave us a brilliant message on risk-taking and how and the need to bring transformation through our neighbours and nations. And that involves us in reaching out to others, pouring into them, taking a risk so that they may be also able to bring transformation. And I just want to inspire you, encourage you this morning, church, with a story, and never to underestimate the potential your investment can have. The time that you spend investing in others. Sometimes we may not see the fruits of that investment, but that doesn't mean it's not going to have an impact. That doesn't mean it doesn't have value. So I want to encourage you to do that, because sometimes it might be only a season that you invest in someone, but collectively, that then allows them to go on to fulfill the will that God has placed upon them. And so this story I want to share with you is about a man named Nicky Cruz. Many of you have probably heard of him. Once a notorious gang leader in New York, his life dramatically changed after he met David Wilkinson that reached out to him, and that led Nicky to encounter Jesus. Now, Nicky went on to become a powerful evangelist, speaking to millions of people over the years. And at the ripe age of 87, he still preaches on occasion. And very early in his ministry, alongside David Wilkinson, Nicky reached out to a young man named Sonny Arganzoni. Sonny was a broken man struggling with heroin addiction, and he was one of the first people to go through Teen Challenge, the ministry that David Wilkinson found, and it was there alongside the investment of Nicky, that his life began to change. And there's a picture that's going to be on the screen, a young Nicky baptizing Sonny in 1960. And Sonny went on to Bible college where he met his wife, Julie. And from there, they founded Victory Outreach. They began their ministry in LA by opening their family home to addicts and gang members. They started to serve them, show them love, and leading many to Christ. And since their humble beginnings in 1967, Victory Outreach has grown from one church to over 700 churches worldwide and various ministries in 30 countries. And if David and Nicky hadn't taken the time to invest in Sonny, he may never have gone to establish Victory Outreach. And at the time, Nicky probably didn't realize the impact that Sonny would have, but he invested anyway. And many people may have overlooked Sonny, but Nicky saw something in him. And maybe today, you might be thinking of who to raise up, and I'll allow you there'll be a time later for a time of reflection, but maybe you've just seen that little bit of something in someone. And I encourage you to invest in that, because we don't know what that's going to produce. And we might not always see the investment, but in a moment we're going to see a picture of David, Nicky, and Sonny later on in life. And through their various ministries, they have reached people all over the globe. And this is disciple making in action. And I, for one, personally, I'm so grateful that that David reached out to Nicky, that Nicky reached out to Sonny, and Sonny went on to build Victory Outreach, because it was myself that found freedom from addiction in a Victory Outreach home. From there, and it's from there that my life began to be transformed by the power and by God's grace, and that brought me here. And now I have great leaders who are pouring into me now, building me up to be the man that God intended me to be. And so, church, I just want you to ponder on what you've heard today. Bryony's going to lead us in a moment, in a time of reflection. But I just really want to encourage you that never underestimate the potential of your investment. Never underestimate what that person that you're raising up can go on and do.